In the previous tutorial, we created a base graph for dynamic wind sound effects. Now, we will use that graph to create sword whoosh effects. You can find the final graph in the melee weapons folder. Note that we usually don't promote all the parameters to input, to avoid making the node too long when you use it in other graphs. So only the important ones get promoted to input. But usually, you will want to customize more. Then, you can clone the whole graph to your project. Like if it's better to clone any graphs you use to your project, to avoid being changed on updates. Something that we do a lot, sorry about that. Okay, before we start building this, let's discuss the sound design aspect first. Needless to say, a melee whoosh effect strongly depends on the type of weapon and its swinging speed. And they also must fit with the artistic direction of your game. In Elden Ring, the animation is kind of slow, so the effect is quite long. Also, they follow a more realistic approach, so most of the time, players can only hear the windy part of the effect. The material part, in this case metallic sounds, is very subtle, their decay scale is high. On the contrary, in the current version of Warframe, melee attacks are very fast. Also, it's a sci-fi fantasy, with space magic game, so they put more emphasis on the material part of the weapon. Thus, their decay scale is lower. Two opposite approaches in two different games. Let's build a sword whoosh graph that can support both of these types. To do that, I will divide this effect into two layers. One for the windy part, and one to describe the material. Okay, let's use dynamic wind graph for the wind. Each type of weapon has a different kind of wind effect. Small and thin weapons, like daggers, will have a higher pitch than a sword. Hammer will have more bass. All of these can be achieved by changing the parameters of our graph. Remember that wooden models will have more bass. Metallic has quite a wide range, from mid to high. Classes are mostly very high, but they can contain some low frequencies too. Starting from version 1.2, we start to add some specific models like this. Only have swords at the moment, but you can use them for other weapons too. For example, let's use wood stick whoosh for this sword graph. I will promote this duration to input so I can adjust it anywhere. Let's set it to 0.2 second for now. Next, I will add an attack and decay node to control the amplitude. MetaSounds has one for float and one for audio. You will understand their differences if you rate their output to a WAV file. I will use a value lower than one for both attack and decay curves. Exponential curves are more natural than linear ones. In Unreal 5.4, there will be more visualization tools right inside MetaSounds. It will be much easier to create sound effects on 5.4. But for now, we have to view the output on another program. The top graph is from the floating point node, and the bottom one is from the audio node. This one has a staircase shape because audio is processed per block rate. This is common for all sound systems, not just MetaSounds. In Unreal, the default block rate is 480 samples, and the default sampling rate is 48,000 samples. This means these inputs and output values are updated every 10 milliseconds. This is the reason for the staircase shape. The audio input and output, however, are arrays. Their length is the same as the block rate, so the output is smooth. In short, the floating point output node isn't as good as the audio one, but they are faster in use. Well, 1/480 memory cost of the audio one. Well, 480 floating points doesn't really cost that much memory. But for this node, we can use the floating point one to control the amplitude, because the synthesizer will interpolate amplitude changes between frames. I will set my decay curve at 0.7, but please feel free to experiment with different values. This dynamic wind node uses cosine force mode, so it has an attack phase at the start. Thus, I don't need the attack phase here, I will just set the attack time to 0. You can use an attack phase if you want the wind-up part to be longer. A longer wind-up will make the whoosh feel weaker. I will multiply the envelope with an input value to control the final gain. I will set the gain to 5 for now. I want the pitches to be less noticeable, so I changed the decay scale to 30. F-cut high is 10,000, so we cut some high frequencies but not entirely. I set F-cut low to 100, if this is a hammer, I will probably set it at 20. Impact strength min is 3 to make it louder. And the range is 0.5 for more variations. Pitch random range is reduced to 1 just to be safe. Most frequencies in this model are quite low. Locking mid and high frequencies feels a bit off. So let's add some to it with Impact Modal Merger. The second model will have a very subtle effect. So you can add any models with mid and high frequencies, mostly the metallic one. Because we will add a second layer later, I will just use Sword Whoosh so I can use it in the second layer. The number of modals is set to 32 since we don't need all of them. I just want a subtle effect, so I set the decay scale to 50. Connect this to our old model, then change this amplitude scale to 5. Remember to change this gain back to 1. Do the same for the decay scale. Let's test this. This is too subtle, so I increase its amplitude. I think it's okay for now, but I want to add a pitch shift to this. You know, to feel the movement a bit. So I add an interpolating node. The duration is the same as our swing duration. To use this node, you need a value node here. Trigger and unplay. And the target value is -6. So the pitch will go down, make it feel heavier. You can also make it go up if you want. So it will be like this. It's subtle, but you can feel it. Also, the great thing about this setup is that I don't have to sweep all the frequencies. If you sweep everything, it sounds like this. The great thing about working with modals is that pitch shifting is basically free, and the results are perfect. Pitch shifting on a WAV file can be very expensive, depending on the algorithm. Like, there is no way anyone will use them in real time for such a tiny portion of the effect. Cheapest and lowest quality way is interpolating, just like in the wave player node. But it will change the speed of the audio, and it's only good with shifting up. You can add some random values to this pitch shift to make it more varied. And this is our first layer. For the second layer, I will use an Impact Force Synthesizer node directly. I will allow this node to be delayed a bit before playing. Nothing fancy, just set the strength to 3. And the impact duration is 0.2, so that the attack and decay phases of the impact force are quite long. I will use a modal randomizer node here. The interpolating time is 0.2. Random chance is 0.8. Amplitude and decay are 0.2. Finally, the pitch range is 0.1. Feel free to experiment with different values. And let's hear it. Okay, it sounds like a middle round between Elden Ring and Warframe. Firstly, let's change the parameters to make this similar to Elden Ring effects. I will call this graph and another graph so it's easier to follow. I will increase the decay scale of the second layer. Also, the effect should be longer, so I will adjust the duration to 0.3 seconds. This sounds like one of those light attacks. A strong attack, well obviously, will be louder, but I will keep the same amplitude. To us humans, loudness is a combination of amplitude, duration, and frequencies. I will decrease the decay scale of the first layer to make those low frequencies have a longer duration. And I'll also change the duration and pitch shift to make it feel stronger. Yeah, you can feel that it's stronger now. Let's try turning this duration to, like, 1 second. to see the limit of our setup. Actually, it sounds not bad. With some modifications, it can probably be used for some skill attacks. Okay, now let's try the approach on Warframe. I will shorten the duration to 0.1 second. Turn the delay to 0. And reduce the gain of the first layer. If you want it to feel even more metallic, you can even use a third modal here. Or do some filtering to reduce low frequencies. And of course, you can reduce the decay scale to make it last longer. Since this is a fully procedural approach, you can change these parameters at any time, even when playing. Like when the player is hit with a slow effect. You can adjust the duration from Blueprint or C++. And since we use multiple layers, you can control every part of the effect to avoid accidentally making it feel stronger when increasing the duration. Before ending, let's compare the performance of this to playing a WAV file. I will write the output to a WAV file, and play it back with a very basic graph like this. Might not even bother changing pitch. You can see that there is a spike at the beginning due to decoder initialization, buffer allocation, etc. If you re-trigger it while playing the graph, it won't have that big spike. If you play a long duration file like some background music, the average cost is very low. Well, obviously not really a fair comparison, since this is much more flexible and interactive. In modern games, it's kind of rare to play the whole sound effect like this. Usually, they are divided into layers and mixed on playing, and either Wwise or Fmod is used. In Unreal 5, MetaSounds is another alternative to these expensive middlewares. So you can make your sound effects more interactive, like adding distance attenuation, spatialization, etc. Just like the one we show you in Lyra Gunshot tutorial. And that's it for this tutorial. There are still plenty of things you can add to make this even better, like using the effects of MetaSounds, or using our utility nodes to modify modal parameters. Since this tutorial is about melee whoosh, next will be melee clashes. I hope you find this helpful, and I'll see you again on the next one.